I remember at the time thinking, I'm done. I'll never, ever be successful again. I'm finished. I used to walk around with a lot of anxiety about everything. I think with me, I just try not to be like people expect me to be. There's a guy called he's kind of my nemesis in Culture Club. The first gig, I literally got shoved on stage. And once I got out there, I got the bug. Just loved it. But I think it's really hard when you've been successful and then suddenly the record company loses interest in you and people aren't so bothered about what you do. When my mum was alive, no matter what I did, she was always there. Everyone loved my dad. And yet he had this other side, which was insane.
This episode is supported by Huel.
George, welcome to High Performance.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with a quote of yours, if you don't mind. I went to a lot of trouble to create Boy George, and then I went through a whole battle for years about not wanting to be him, but now I enjoy and embrace it in a way I wasn't able to as a young person. I'm finally learning to be George Allen O'Dowd from Eltham. How did you get to the point where you're comfortable with yourself?
Well, I think I've always known who I am since even from the first day of becoming famous. I always thought I'm still George from Eltham. But I remember having a conversation with my then manager, Tony Gordon, because, when you're like 17, you're like, I'll never change. Doesn't matter how much money I make. Doesn't matter how famous I get. I'll always be me. And I remember him saying to me, people will treat you differently when you're famous. Therefore, you won't be able to behave the same. It just won't be possible. And actually, that was really true because, in my case, because, when I'm not dressed up, I'm kind of like less recognizable. So I can slip by unnoticed. I go on the tube and the bus. I walk around pretty much freely. And I love that. But then when I dress up, it's a whole nother thing. People treat me like this in a totally different way to me and my civvies. And there's lots of interesting things that happen. You like to think that you kind of get to see humanity in all its ugliness, when people don't know who you are. And then, of course, when they do, they change and it's hilarious. Sometimes you actually feel terrible for them because they have to do a quick about turn, and it's, I think being a Gemini, I feel like I like fuss, but it also gets on my nerves. So like if you don't treat me like I'm special, it will annoy me. But if you overdo it, it will equally annoy me. So I feel like there's a balance. It's the twins always looking for some sort of equilibrium where, I've got a sense of who I am as a person. I'm not deluded, but at the same time, I'm not going to be treated with disrespect. So there's always a really interesting debate that goes on all the time with fame, And I think when I was 17 or 18 or even in my 30s, I used to walk around with a lot of anxiety about everything. People staring at me and I'm in public, I'm in a restaurant and all the rest of it. And I guess in the last 15 years, I decided to kind of turn off that part of myself that's, I took away the anxiety. I practiced this thing called the 3 principles. Somebody taught me this way of rethinking the way I look at things. And it was absolutely life-changing for me. In fact, from the first session, I was just in fits of laughter going, oh my fucking God.
Really?
I'm making it all up. It's all in my imagination. When you suddenly realize that you cannot possibly go out and say what an audience is thinking. People come off stage, they go, the audience was terrible. It's impossible. How can the entire audience be terrible? But it's the way that we think as human beings. So through learning the 3 principles, because I kind of always had these instincts from a kid, I always had this different way of thinking, but I wasn't able to analyze it. And I think through practicing the 3 principles, I suddenly went, oh, I've always thought this, but I was never able to get here before I reacted.
Right.
So it's learning to, if you're about to send someone a text, do you really want to say this? Is what you really feel right now going to be the same in 10 minutes? Generally, when you wait 5 or 10 minutes, your whole attitude towards something has changed. And I think I've always been able to kind of change my mind, but I've got better at doing it faster. Do you understand me?
Yeah,
so
I do
instead
understand
I used to walk around, like I go into a restaurant with sunglasses on, disaster. Sunglasses just cause more attention.
You're asking for attention, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not. It's like you're hiding, but you're also saying, look at me. It's like, it's the weird thing. And I think once you kind of decide that you're going to be relaxed about being who you are, being a public person, everything kind of shifts. And it's just weird how people just behave differently because you're not dragging that anxiety with you. You're not trying not to be seen. You're not trying to be seen. It's fine if it happens. If it doesn't, it's also fine. So when people come up to me now, I am entirely different. Not that I was ever rude, but if I wasn't ready, or if I wasn't dressed a certain way, I'd freak out. Whereas now I'm like, hi, you're going to get this version of me, whatever I'm doing. And I'm always friendly to everybody because I'd much rather somebody walked away and went, wasn't he lovely, than what?
Yeah. We'll talk about the 3 principles in a moment. I'm sure Damian will be very interested in that. Before we get there, though, who's in front of us today?
A mixture of the two, I guess, because I look, like Boy George, but I'm still George. Alan, no doubt. I mean, I don't think of myself as a sort of third person.
Yeah.
It's really just that I understand dressing up comes with a certain responsibility. So people will make comments about the way you look, and, if you're recognizable as something that people know, they just behave differently, So, if I'm on there was a funny thing the other day, I was on the tube and there was this fantastic girl on the platform, like outrageous, like dressed outrageous. And everyone was staring at her. And I wanted to, but I was in my civvies. And what happens is that when you meet someone that's 19 that's dressed up and I'm in sweatpants, they got no fucking idea who they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They don't realise. So a lot of the time, people make assumptions about you based on how you look. We're all guilty of that. If you look rich, if you look weird, if you look whatever, if you look too gay, whatever it may be, you're always dealing with that all the time. And I think for me, I get a lot of those extremes.
Yeah.
Depending on what I'm doing, what I'm wearing, where I am, who's looking at me. It's a sort of constant conversation that you have with the world. And people assuming they know everything about you based on what they've read or what they think they've read. It's kind of a lifetime's work, but I definitely am very good at detaching from everything. Somebody said to me just now, I saw you in the jungle. I literally forgot about it 2 minutes after I was in there. I was like, next.
Really?
I mean, I have this ability to kind of move on and not hold on to things. I've always had it. And it freaks people out because I don't tend to sort of moan about what's happened.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's happened. Boring. Move on. So I think that's a good thing that I have. It's definitely been a rocky road, but I feel like even the shit that's happened to me, I've been able to kind of take responsibility for it and not feel like I have to blame the rest of the world. I feel like, well, it's my own fault.
Busy parents, this one's for you. We've partnered with Huel, who've created the ultimate meal on the go, containing 35 grams of protein, 26 essential vitamins and minerals to ensure you're getting the right amount of protein, essential fats, carbohydrates, fiber, vitamins and minerals as part of a balanced diet. All you've got to do is click the link in the description to unlock your offer now at huel.com/high performance.
What lessons have you learned from those difficult times and bad decisions?
I think everyone's winging it. Like, no one really knows what the fuck they're doing. So we're all crawling across a rock, So we're all crawling across this rock at the same time. And, I suppose I always go back to the idea that, when you're a kid, you're given a name and a narrative about who you are. And that's instructed by your family to a certain degree. And if you're lucky or a little bit different, you break away and you break the chain and become something else. But you also go back to all the good things about your family. I have a really interesting relationship with my brothers. I love them all. They're brilliant, all of them. They're really funny, really different to me, but similar.
Yeah.
There's some things about them I go, yeah, but there's this thing that they're all the same, really. Even my brother Richard, even though he's got a different dad, he's totally my brother. He's the driest, funniest person you will ever meet. It's hilarious. The sort of person you want to get cornered by at a party, especially when he's had a drink. He's hilarious. And I think it's kind of knowing what's important to you as well. Like, who do you love? Who do you care about? Who do you trust? All that stuff I think is essential, and I would say my mum's gone now, but when my mum was alive, no matter what I did, she was always like, she was always there to pick up the pieces. And I remember when I got clean, and I was like, I was at a meeting, and somebody was talking about their mum, and it got me really emotional. I was like sobbing, I went out to my mum, and I was like, "Oh, Mum, I just watched this share, and I'm so sorry." She goes, "Oh, don't be sorry, just don't do it again." And that was how she was,
But you earlier described that you were able just to move on. Things had happened to you, and then you could move on, and it sounds that's exactly what your mum was doing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but I think she put up with more things than I did.
Right.
Like she definitely put up with more stuff. I would never have put up with the things that my mum put up with. But then if you think about it, in the 1960s, my mum had like a bunch of kids. By the 70s, she had 6 kids. What was she going to do? There was nowhere for her to go. If she went home to her mother, she'd send her back home. Often we went to my grandma's and she put us back on the train the next morning because the view was you can't take kids away from their father.
Yeah.
So there wasn't really, Mum didn't have any money, wasn't free. It was only when I got famous I was able to give her money, and, she went around the world and had the most brilliant time, went on cruises. She went everywhere.
I love that.
Went everywhere, Russia, I took her everywhere. She always wanted to come. Even when my mum was ill towards the end, if I said I'm going to Australia, she goes, "Stick me on the back of the plane, I'll be no trouble." She always wanted to go, even when she was not well. She just loved it,
Your early days are intriguing because we meet a lot of guests and we sometimes use the phrase that the ghost of your childhood that rattles around your adult body. A lot of it happens to you at that younger age. And you were a guy that experienced some pretty traumatic incidents in your life. Like you write in your book around coming home one day and finding your mum under the kitchen table and your dad brandishing a knife. You use a line that you say, it's hard to have sympathy for bullies when they're punching you in the face.
Yeah.
So you've gone through and experienced some of these things. What are the ghosts that are still there that you haven't quite practiced yet through the principles?
I don't think there are that many, because I'm quite good at forgiving. I forgave my dad a long, long time ago. I mean, I spent hours talking to my father, sometimes through the night. There were times when I remember coming back from a rave one night, high on ecstasy, and my dad was in my house, and I just sat there for 7 hours talking to my dad about his marriage, and I was thinking, has he got any idea that I'm off my nut, And he didn't, but I remember talking to my dad and sort of trying to reason with him, like, why can't you just get divorced from my mum and be her friend? Why do you have to carry this on? But that generation, my mum too, my mum and dad were both Aquarians, and Aquarians are martyrs.
Right.
And you can't tell them anything. They were so similar. When I was growing up, I used to think that they were very different, but later on I realised they were quite similar. And they both believed in this idea of marriage, even though it was a really dysfunctional marriage. They just couldn't let it go. They couldn't be wrong. And it was so insane because I would sit with my mum as well and just go, just leave him. Even when I was 14. I used to say, "I'll pack the bags." I was always trying to get her to leave, and she just wouldn't. She just believed in marriage. She believed in that sort of, not particularly overly religious, but certainly enough faith to think that it was the wrong thing to do.
Right.
But, for me, I just forgave my dad, because it was the only sensible thing to do. I had a thing a few years ago when I was doing the sound bath, and the woman was like, "You might have some things happening." And I, although I explore those things, I could be quite cynical. I was like, "Oh, I know it's going to be relaxing, And while I was under, my dad appeared. And I had this whole 20-minute thing with my dad. It was just like a silent stand-up. My dad was sitting there, I was sitting there looking at him, and nothing was really said. And then after, the woman said, "Did anything happen?" I said, "My fucking dad was there." And she goes, "How did that feel?" I said, "It was kind of great." It was like nothing was said, and it felt like we were saying to each other, "It's done. We don't need to have this out anymore." It's like, what's the point? We're talking about ghosts. I'm having an argument with someone that doesn't exist except in my memory. So my imagination wants to hold him to some of the things he did because he was also amazing. When I first came out, he was totally relaxed. He was like, "Oh, you're still my son, you're brilliant, and all that, and don't talk about it." And, there was a lot of things about my dad that were brilliant. He was charming and funny. Everyone loved my dad. He could walk down the street, everyone used to shout his name out, "All right, Jerry." It was like the Pied Piper. And yet he had this other side, which was, insane, where he would literally lose it and smash the entire house to pieces and pull things over and just be like, what, over nothing, So that was an interesting thing to live with as a kid,
And how do you feel it has shaped your adult relationships, so seeing that kind of chaos or that uncertainty?
I'm pretty loyal. I stay in relationships and friendships long whilst they sell by date.
Right.
Because we were talking about this earlier, I think if you want loyalty, you have to be loyal. You can't demand something that you're not prepared to give yourself. So I am quite forgiving. I definitely will look at a person and say they can't help it because of what they've been through as a kid. There are some people you think, I don't really want you in my sort of personal life, but I don't hate you. And I sort of have a sort of, I don't want to mention any names, but there are certain characters in my life where I think you're part of my life. I'll always love you, but maybe I won't invite you to dinner. Or, with certain people, some friends don't go together. You know what I mean? If I was arranging a dinner party, there are some friends who think, maybe not that one, It's all about choosing the right people.
Can we talk about the courage of your convictions? Because I think if you have a father who at times can be overbearing or can share a strong opinion about how you should live and what you should do, for you to then create this incredible identity in at times what might have been an unforgiving house, correct me if I'm wrong, but definitely was an unforgiving world, right? Where we all had to conform to a certain way of living and acting. Where did that courage come from to truly be you, do you think?
Well, I think my mum, because my mum was a bit of a rebel. My mum ran away when she was like 14.
Is that right?
She ran away to England from Ireland. And my grandmother sent her sister to go and find her. She was in Liverpool. No address, just sent her off. I think the sister was only a year older, so my mum was 14. And then, of course, my mum had a child out of wedlock. She was about to get married. The guy obviously ran away.
Yeah.
And my grandmother brought up my brother till he was 5. My mum came to England to try and raise money to take care of Richard herself. So I think my mum was very rebellious and very single-minded. And, she was a typical Aquarian woman. She could do anything. If my dad didn't put the tiles up, my mum would do it. She would lay a floor. She just had that ability. I know a lot of Aquarians that are very, good at getting on with it. And my mum was one of those people. If you wouldn't wallpaper the wall, she'd do it herself. And she did it good.
And what did she say to you in terms of the upbringing that gave you the confidence to be like, you know what, yeah, I'm going to dress like this. I am going to act in
I
this
think because my dad stopped my mum from being glamorous. My dad was very jealous. So if my mum put on a good coat, she was having an affair. If she put on makeup, who was she sleeping with? So it was constant sort of pressure not to look glamorous.
Right.
And of course, as a kid, being a little gay kid, my mum dressed up was like heaven. My mum, with her eyelashes on and her hair done. My mum was very stylish as well. And she liked nice clothes, but my dad suppressed her. So I think when I started to dress up, at first my mum was like terrified I was going to get beat up. That was the big fear, if you go out like that, you're going to get killed. But then at a certain point when she realised I wasn't going to grow out of it, she sort of became my collaborator. And she would make a lot of clothes for me and she would, not encourage me, but certainly she accepted it. And even my dad to a certain extent, my dad would in the beginning when I was dressing up, my mum would go, look at him. And my dad would just lower his newspaper and go, if he wants to get beat up, let him go out like that. So, South East London, I did a lot of running.
Yeah.
But when you're like 17, 16, you don't consider other people's opinions. You don't think, someone's going to be upset if I look like this. And you kind of like it as well.
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sort of eccentricity is that you kind of want to piss people off, but you don't really want them to beat you up. But you want them to raise an eyebrow. It's finding that balance between being, doing it for yourself, but also enjoying the fact that people have got a problem with it. It's quite punk rock.
But that leads me into the question about, there was, you tell the anecdote about when you met Muhammad Ali and your dad had the picture of him and
the Pope.
and the Pope up, and he's right in the book that your dad said, I'm embarrassed about you, but I'm also proud of you. And they're two very conflicting emotions. And I'm wondering, how as a young man, did you reconcile them?
I don't really know because, again, I think it's belligerence. You just think, who cares what you think? It's like, it's not your problem, My dad used to, during the punk times, I used to nick a lot of my dad's paint splash clothes and overalls and wear them out to clubs. And my dad could never understand why I was, I was like, these are authentic. They're the real deal, covered in paint. You couldn't fake it. And I think at a certain point, they just kind of accepted that they thought I was going to grow out of it. Definitely, they thought, it'll be a few years and they'll get a job and calm down. So when I started the band, that was like relief in a way, because it was like, okay, that's what he's going to do. But up until that point, I think they were very despairing about my appearance.
Can we talk about the 3 principles? Because I've read a few really fascinating quotes from you, but my favourite one, when you explained it, was you said that life happens through us and not to us.
Absolutely.
And that was an understanding that you came through. So would you explain for us and for listeners, what are the 3 principles and how can we all
mind,
use
thought, and consciousness. There's collective consciousness, what you think everybody else is thinking, but half the time it's what they say to you is that if you have a partner, don't look at your partner and think, I should know everything about you. That's very limiting. What happens is that we get these narratives about ourselves, about other people, and we tend to stick to them. So in a relationship, somebody does one thing and you always react in the same way, and then you wonder why.
So give us an example of what you mean, Josh.
Well, like just snapping at someone, being impatient, being rude, being anxious. It doesn't make things better. Do you understand? So if you can't have a rational conversation with somebody and not change what you think about it, because, sometimes you think, it's all about me. They're doing it to me. I'm being attacked. You know what I mean? It's like, particularly in the public eye, you could take everything that's written about you really seriously. And I've had some vile things written about me. And I also look sometimes at the comments and think, fuck, people are so nasty. But I also laugh about it. There's certain things that people have said about me 20 years ago that I laugh about now. I think it's hilarious for what people say. But in terms of the 3 principles, it's just nothing is set in stone. Nothing that you think has to be set in stone. And you don't always have to go down the same route when something happens. When you're someone like me, there's a lot of reputation. Oh, he's difficult, he's bitchy, he's this, he's that.
Yep.
And it's quite fun when you walk in and blow people's minds by not being what they thought. It's about also learning to, like when you do nothing, to do it with absolute skill. When it's watching some shit TV, eating bad food, it's about really doing that with a lot of style.
Why does that matter?
Because I like working, but it's also good to not do anything. Learning to I love my own company. I'm quite good with being alone.
Yeah.
But too much of that's obviously not good. But, I like to work. So people will say to me, you never stop. And I'm like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? So I don't really get tired. I don't really get stressed. People say, it must be stressful. I'm like, well, maybe for you. Do you know what I mean? People tell you a lot of things about themselves, but they try and put it on you.
Yeah.
You must be tired. You must be this. I'm like, well, no, I'm not. It's a bit like when people say, do you believe in God, right? If you believe in God, God exists. If you don't, he doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, it's like this whole Trump thing. It's like you could get everyone, let's get all hysterical about that. Or not. There's always somewhere else to put your head in terms of the way you think about things. Because what happens is everybody does this collective sigh. And we're all supposed to join in. Like there's no other way of thinking. And I think the 3 principles teaches you that there's always other ways of thinking. There's a lot of words, there's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of space in terms of what you can think about things. And, weirdly, I'm born on the same day as Donald Trump.
Really?
Me, Donald Trump, Alan Carr, Paul O'Grady, and Che Guevara.
There you go.
So we should start a fucking band. Amazing. But, it's funny because you think, well, it's kind of a weird thing that's going on in the world, but like, so what?
Yeah.
I'm still me. Life is still going to go on. Do you know what I mean? People get so caught up in it.
But you used a really intriguing word, George, earlier. You said, I practice these 3 principles. How could anyone listen to this, practice them?
Listen to the guy that started was this guy called Sydney Banks. And there's, again, loads of stuff on YouTube. Sydney Banks was a welder that had this epiphany. Yeah, it was this kind of interesting guy that he knew all these psychologists that worked with marriage guidance in the, I think, 60s, late 50s, 60s. And he was looking at their success rate and it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
And so he came up with this new way of looking at kind of relationships and things like divorce. And there's a lot of people that do these testimonials online about how he saved their marriages, that they were literally at the end of their tether, they were going to fall apart.
Right.
And just through learning to look at their partner in a different way, it changed everything. And there's a lot of, I've met some of these amazing people. There's a guy called Jack Pransky who's in his 70s. I met him in Boston 2 years ago. And I remember saying to him, what one thing would you tell me to do? What would you tell me? And he goes, listen. And I just started laughing because I was like, all my life, I've been told, you don't fucking listen. And it's like about, not jumping to the first response that comes to mind, not texting the first thing that you think of, not snapping back instantly to go, wait a minute, how do I really feel about this?
Listening to this now, you sound almost bulletproof. You had dad with very strong opinions. You were having to kind of peg quick around the streets of Eltham to get away from people who didn't like the way that you looked or dressed or acted. Yet the truth is that when your music was released and you got some hard reviews on that, some very negative, critical reviews. I mean, you said, and I can read again from here, you said you can still recite one of them perfectly. It was written in 1982. I mean, it's now 2024. Can you still...
The only thing that Culture Club got going for them is the hideously unphotogenic Boy George, ignore the airbrush sleeve. That was part of it. I remember thinking, I knew that was crap because I knew I looked great on the sleeve. It was
Which you did, by the way.
I did look good, and I knew I did, you know. Similarly, there was this hilarious article by Paulie Yates, who I knew quite well, but not at this point. Marilyn, my friend Marilyn at the time, this is before Fame, Paulie Yates did a column in Number One magazine, and she wrote this really vile article about Marilyn, saying he was a freak and a creature, but then posted this amazing photo of Marilyn looking like stunning. I was like, look at the picture, you look amazing. She's just jealous, It's that funny thing of, again, you're back to that sort of, you kind of don't care what people think because you're not just doing it for other people, but also you quite like the fact that they're a little bit like bothered. They notice you, Even now today when I walk around, I get looks off people. People like, and I'm like, it's
right?
like, depends who it is, I had some people moving stuff in my house the other day, and there's this one guy, he was like really like looking at my art, you could just see he was really bothered by who I was. And I was just like, fuck off.
What sort of art is it?
Oh, I've got like this stuff. I've got stuff, a lot of my stuff on the walls in my house, the stuff I've made myself. I've got this massive painting I did of Elton John in the hallway, which is quite spectacular. You can just tell that when people are uncomfortable around. I think the problem is when you're comfortable with who you are, what you are. My sexuality is so uninteresting to me. It's like, as I said when I was 16, it's like eating a bag of crisps. Who gives a fuck? Because I can see that my straight friends have exactly the same problems I have. It's just different sex, the same thing.
And I'm sure it helps with the 3 principles comes to mind when you talk about being judged in your own house by someone that you've not just invited to be in there, but
of course you might be making it up. But
exactly.
Sometimes people look a certain way and you think, there's no other way to read it. If somebody's not friendly, because I'm very friendly. Do you know what I mean? I'm always friendly to everyone, so, but if they're not friendly back, you get the suspicion they might not like you.
That idea that someone's opinion of you is none of your business.
To a certain extent, well, if it's in your house, it is.
Then it's a bit different.
You're like, could you leave,
So how did you learn to insulate yourself against the criticism and the negativity? Because the 3 principles is recent, and you were not going through this process back in the 1980s, right?
No, I've explored lots of other ideas, though.
Yeah.
I went to India and did this whole pilgrimage in India, and I've always been fascinated by religion or spirituality or whatever it may be, but also with the quite cynical side to it. Yeah. Like I'm always like, because at the end of the day, I'm not sure what I believe. Do you know what I mean? I sort of almost believe in everything.
Are you spiritual?
I think saying you're spiritual is like, you can have a dog collar on or a hijab or whatever. It doesn't mean you are that thing. You just dress like it.
Yeah.
Your behavior is what shapes your spiritual life, not what you say you are. Do you know what I mean? So people can dress how they like and wear what they like. It doesn't mean that they're embodying the principles of what they say they look like. So you're back to that whole thing of like, assuming just because someone looks a certain way, they're a certain type of person. Of course, that's absolute rubbish.
I'm going to tell you a secret that I've noticed about high performers. They are laser focused on the power of the gut. You heard me right, the gut. Because the gut and overall health are intrinsically linked. And that's why so many high performers take a probiotic. And one which keeps on being discussed is this, Biotic by Heights. Like, I've been taking it for over a year now, and it is so good. It's one of only 3 products in Europe that's Informed Sports certified. That means it's taken by Olympians, Premier League footballers, Guinness World Record holders, international rugby players. Quite simply, this is gut health for champions. So master your microbiome and treat yourself to a high-performing gut for a high-performance lifestyle with 20% off your first month. Just go to heights.com/HP or enter the code HP20 at checkout to get 20% off and start seeing the difference that Heights could make to your health.
So can we talk about the band? Because, again, what really struck me, and I wasn't aware of this, was that you were a band of outsiders. Again, you had that line, we had an Anglo-Saxon guitarist, the gay Irish singer, a Jamaican bass player and a Jewish drummer. You literally were the culture club, like you were an inclusive...
I mean, it wasn't like... We didn't go out of our way to find weird people. It was just like who turned up. You know, it was sort of potluck in a way. I was in this band called Bow Wow Wow for about 3 weeks. I got fired, and Malcolm McLaren, who's the manager of Bow Wow Wow and the Sex Pistols, he sort of made an announcement in one of the music papers that I'd been fired. And there was a picture of me and Annabella Lewin and me, and it said, I was called Lieutenant Lush. It said, Lieutenant Lush's dreams of fame are over because he's been kicked out of Bow Wow Wow. And it was such a brief experience, but I got the bug for being in a band.
And why were you kicked out?
I want to do this. This is good, you know. I'd done 2 gigs with Bow Wow Wow. And the first gig, I literally got shoved on stage by one of the tour managers.
Right.
And once I got out there, I was like, oh, yeah, this is great. Oh, I fucking love this. So it was really just more of an accident. I mean, I've always loved music and I always wanted to make music, but I never thought that I would become a musician. I didn't think that that was possible. You know, I didn't plan the career that I've had.
Yeah.
I would probably wanted to be in fashion or PR or something, just anything that was to do with people. I was really interested in working with people, being around people.
Yeah.
And the music thing was really just a bit of an accident, really.
But we talk about diversity a lot in this day and age and how we need to value it. But the group that you had literally was as diverse as you could imagine and ended up being incredibly successful. And I'm wondering if now, with the benefit of hindsight, you can identify what was it that made it such a success?
I think in my case, there was a kind of ordinariness about me that people found quite funny. Because obviously I looked a certain way, but then I opened my mouth and you could clearly tell I was from South East London. So there was that kind of like, a lot of my contemporaries carried themselves in quite a pretentious manner.
Right.
I'm wearing makeup, so I have to be all sort of snooty and up my own arse. It's never really been my thing. I've always been a bit relaxed about it. I mean, you are pretending to be something every time you dress up. And when you sort of believe it to the point where it overtakes your life, then you're in trouble. Because really, you know, if you see the way people are reacting like to drag queens now, I mean, it's just so ridiculous. It's just somebody in a bit of fabric. Do you know what I mean? But I've always known that, even from the early days when I started dressing up, that I was kind of pretending to be someone, or I was dressing up as someone, whatever. I was changing the way I looked because I thought it made me look better. I didn't think I was that interesting as a sort of normal person. When I discovered like clothing and makeup, and I was like, oh, fucking hell, look at this. And, you know, I just started to see what was possible. And I never really grew out of it. It just kind of got worse, you know. And obviously when you're 17, you're definitely doing it for attention. But when you're 63, you're like, I'm not doing it for you.
But how did you avoid yourself sort of starting to get high on your own supply of believing that that I'm Boy George, like
Bad use
I think that there's lots of examples of me making mistakes, and you know, I've been on this journey. You know, I've done lots of stupid things. I've been arrested more times than I care to mention in the UK and America. One of my biggest fears was being arrested in America, and I fucking did it. And you know, I remember at the time thinking, I'm done. I'll never, ever be successful again. I'm finished. And it's amazing, you know, what you can get through. You know, I think, you know, it's sometimes the things you fear are the things that you almost end up doing, you know, creating the worst possible scenario.
Yeah.
And I think that's about, I think in my case, it's just about learning to take what I do seriously, not letting it consume me, but saying, well, you're Boy George. You created him, so treat him with a bit of respect. So I think it's more about, you know, learning that this actually can be a lot more fun than it was. You know, it's if I could go back and say, you know, of course I've had brilliant times and I've had a laugh and it's always been good, but it could be more fun.
Right.
And when you realize it could be more fun without any effort, it's not that anything has to happen. It's literally the way you look at what you're doing. You know, so when I was on Broadway last year, that whole experience was so different to anything I've ever done because I went to America and I decided to leave my insecure self in London. I thought, I'm going to America. They booked me because they think I'm amazing. Let's be fucking amazing. And I went in there with a very different attitude. And even when I was going on stage every night, I'd be like, this is going to be great. I did this thing called tapping as EFT. So I would say, this is going to be amazing. This performance is going to be great. Instead of sitting there panicking about, what if I don't remember my lines? Literally say to yourself, you're going to be great. This is going to be brilliant. And even if you just think it, it's amazing how you walk on and you forget that you've done it, but you go, oh, that was fucking good because I told myself that it was going to be good.
And how does that compare to the George of 1985?
I was much more insecure, much more difficult, much more, I'm not doing that, and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, I mean, if somebody told me how to do choreography, I'd run a mile. Fucking dancing, you know. Just instead of like, when you're acting, you have to not be yourself. You have to forget who you are, what you look like, what the clothes, you just have to forget it. And one of the things I was able to do in New York was become Harold Ziedler and actually forget that I was Boy George and forget that I didn't normally wear clothes like this and, oh, you know, because I think sometimes famous people try to shape everything into what they think they should be.
Yep.
And if you want to act, you have to forget who you are completely. And one of the compliments I got from my own brothers were like, oh, it was so good. You were nothing like you. Because they thought they were going to come and go, yes, my brother on stage, like, la, 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 you know, doing what he does. And they were all quite impressed by the fact that I was able to become the character as much as I physically could.
I think it's so powerful that you've reached the point where actually enjoying it is at the forefront. Then it's also interesting how many people have sat in that chair, high achieving people who reflect on their careers and go, I didn't spend any time enjoying it because the pressure to be successful was too great, or the kind of the mental gymnastics I was doing in my head just to exist in a world of fame was too great. And you've now reached this point, which I think is great. And we'll talk a bit more about how you got there. But going back to the Boy George of 40 odd years ago, when you were making some bad decisions, right? When you were getting arrested, when you did have a bad relationship with drugs and other things. What was causing those decisions? Like, why were you making those
I think sometimes
almost self-sabotaging
Sometimes
decisions?
it's proximity, you know? Sometimes you sit down at the table and people put food in front of you and you eat it because it's there. And I think sometimes with drugs, it's the same thing. You're around that world and somebody goes, oh, do you want to try this? And unless you're really strong-willed, you know, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, let me try it. And one thing I know about myself is I can't do one of anything.
Right.
One cigarette,
Yeah.
one, you know, meal, one anything is impossible for me. And that's something you learn in recovery, that, you know, you have no control over that impulse. And that's why it's good to sort of, you know, have a program where you go, actually, I need to call someone because I feel like doing this, or I'm feeling self-destructive, you know. And again,
Do you still get those moments now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. But I have so many people in my life in recovery. There's always someone to tell you that you're acting out, whatever it may be, you know, because you can replace drugs with something else. attention, arguing, sex, money, all those things can become, everyone out there is kind of addicted to something. Everyone. I don't think there's anyone out there that I know that isn't kind of obsessed with one thing or another, but some things are more damaging than other things.
So can we talk about your art then? Because we've got it on the wall here behind us, and I know that this is something that, when you said before, if you're going to do nothing, throw yourself all in and do it with style. You've obviously decided to throw yourself into the creation of art. Would you tell us where that came from?
Well, I've always made art. To start with, I just did it to put on my own walls because, I don't know, I just used to think, I'd see things and, I can do something like that. Maybe I could do it better or whatever, or put my stamp on it. And at school, the only thing I really was good at was art. That was the only thing I got any good grades in. Everything else was like, basically needs to try harder. If you stop looking out the window, the only place where I was really allowed to be myself was art class. And my art teacher was a guy called Mr. Riddock, and he was brilliant, and he was very encouraging and funny and personable and liked children. He wasn't one of these teachers that didn't like kids, because I felt like when I was at school, all the teachers really hated you. It was like, especially if you were from a known family like me. Right. My brother Richard had been arrested for stealing lead off the roof of our school. So I went into school as a kind of named person. Oh, you're like your fucking brother. And I got a lot of comments like that. And, there was corporal punishment at my school. You got caned and hit, and people threw blackboard rubbers at you, and teachers hit you. In the 70s, everyone hit you. It was like neighbours hit you, everyone hit you. It was allowed. So for me, going to school was just like hell. I hated it. But art was the one thing that I was good at. And in fact, when I got expelled, one of the last things I saw was a picture I'd done of my sister, Siobhan, a pencil drawing that had won a prize, and it was on the wall. And I remember thinking I should have grabbed it when I was leaving, but, I didn't think I would ever be doing art again. So I left it hanging there. They probably chucked it in the bin. But I remember also another time, just before I got famous, I stood outside Radio 1, and I'd done this picture of Bowie at school. And I thought, I'm going to meet someone and give it to them. Maybe Bowie, whatever. And the only famous person that came out of the building was David Hamilton. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
And obviously I was like, oh, hello, nice to meet you. And I goes, I'm going to give you this picture of Bowie. And literally about 9 months later, I would say, maybe 9 months later, a year later, he was the first person to play Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? He didn't know who the fuck I was. I was just some little kid that walked up to him outside the station and went, here's a picture I've done of Bowie. He probably thought, why do I want this? In the bin. But weirdly, about a year later, he was the first person to play Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? Menace Record of the Week on Radio 2. So isn't that interesting that sort of, I guess the frequency of that always feels like quite poignant to me, it's...
But it sounds like art was somewhere that you either rekindled that sense of being valued by your teacher at school, or was a sanctuary.
I feel like, I've done a few art shows, obviously, over the last few years, and, I've sold quite a bit of art, and there's something really exciting about selling a painting, because it feels like applause. Do you know what I mean? It's like when someone goes, oh, I love this, I want to put it in my house, And, a lot of the stuff I do, these are screen prints, but I do I bead my art, so it's all hand beaded and sewn, and it's quite fashion based, and it's definitely off the wall what I do.
But I think there's something really interesting about the fact that, one, you're just backing yourself to do it, that you're not like looking for the rules of art, you're just deciding to create. And I think, and it seems that there's a parallel of the creativity when you were writing music, when you're performing on Broadway, as well as this. Can you explain a little bit about the creative process of how...
One of the things that's changed for me since doing the Free Principles and since the pandemic, really, the pandemic was the turning point in terms of me understanding how simple making music was. It's something that I've grown up with. People have mythologized it like it's really difficult, blah, blah, blah. But having all this time during the pandemic, I was like, what am I going to do? Because I'm going to go crazy. So I started to kind of go back into why I wrote, how I wrote, what was my process. And, I was on the internet a lot, and I just started to pull apart songs that I'd written, looking at other people's songs. And when you start pulling apart songs, you realize none of it's Shakespearean. and never meant to cause you any sorrow and never meant to cause you any pain, you know. As you take away the music and take away the person, it all becomes quite innocent and simple. And you realize that you can actually sing about anything. And so I think for me, I was lucky enough to have a bubble with a friend of mine called Benny D, who's a writer and a producer. And we managed to keep on working all the way through the pandemic. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And I've probably got enough to release like 20 albums right now. You have to push yourself in terms of finding things to write about. And, you know, it's interesting when you work with when I work with young artists, you know, you see how frustrated they get because they feel like they have to wait for some divine intervention. It's not real. And it's like, nothing's fucking real.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, so when I'm tweeting, if I tweet something to someone and I think, oh, that's a fucking great line. There was a thing last year, I was having a row with some anti-trans people and I wrote Mind Your Own Existence. And I thought it's a great hook. And I've got a song out right now called Mind Your Own Existence, which came from that conversation. Similarly with a piece of art, I might say something and go, actually, I'm going to do a painting called that.
Whether it's the artwork, whether it's the music, whether it was the clothes you wore in the early days, whether it's a relationship with your parents, whether it's what you did during the pandemic, whether it's your sort of relentless obsession now with writing music and creating stuff, whether it's deciding what clothes to wear today, it feels to me like everything is about exploration. And I'd love to just talk about the power of that for people that maybe have stopped exploring in their lives, what exploration does for you.
There was an interesting moment in the middle of Moulin Rouge where I was kind of like, this is repetitive. I did 112 shows. And I was like, in the middle of it, I was like, oh God, I've had enough of it. And I just went online and was like, what do you do when you're over it? And this thing popped up, well, you're it. So if you're over it, you're over you. And then I thought, actually, all right, there's still things I need to make better in the show. So it is, I think, a lot of the time about having conversations with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now, he tells this great story about being on the tube and seeing this guy like talking to himself really loudly and everyone's sort of looking and thinking he's the maniac. And he decided to follow this guy. And he went into his university and it turns out he was a lecturer. And then he realized we're all doing it. We just don't do it out loud. So the narrative that we have in our heads about you're this, you're that, you're in, you know, whatever it may be, you're the one that's firing that 24/7 and talking to yourself, which might sound ridiculous. You know, as soon as you wake up in the morning, I'm in a good mood. I tell myself, today's going to be brilliant. Walking into here, I'm like, this is going to be great. I tell myself, this is going to be a great interview. I'm going to be relaxed, you know, and maybe some people are lucky that they don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But I understand that that's a really important process for me, that I have to remind myself to enjoy myself.
And in the spirit of curiosity, which again sounds like a trait from your mum, I wanted to ask you about something that really jumped out when I read your book was just the courage to go and get yourself a coach. You know, you said that you went and got yourself a performance coach.
Acting coach, and Charlie Walker Wise.
Yeah.
I say I'm Charlie Walker Wise these days. It was a really smart thing that I did. I didn't know why I was doing it. I did a gig for Chris Evans. I did Carfest. And I saw a clip of myself and I thought, I look like I'm just wandering around the stage like a lunatic. I didn't know. I looked like I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember being on stage thinking, oh, I don't know what to say. I felt like I was out of practice. I felt like, what's wrong with me? You know, I should be in charge of this.
Had you been off stage for a while?
Not really, but it'd been a while since I'd done such a big gig.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I'm a bit lost. What's wrong with me? And I thought maybe I should take some lessons in like public speaking or something that's given me a bit of confidence. And I had a choice of two people. And because Charlie worked for RADA, I was like, RADA, perfect,
Heard of
RADA,
that.
darling, you know.
Yeah.
So I got him. And I have to say, you know, we would do like 2-hour sessions. The first hour would be like therapy. In fact, I had a therapist. I got rid of my therapist. I was like, I've got this guy now, and he's
So
like
what sort of stuff would you discuss?
we
that
would
feel like that?
discuss everything from, you know, how I was feeling to what had been going on. Like if I'd had a band rehearsal, I might say I had a massive row with Roy about something, and if they had that going, I'd tell him what I'd said, and he'd go, oh, yeah, that's a bit harsh. I said this and I did that. And he go, and how did that go? And I go, it was a disaster. He goes, It's when you get someone pointing out the sort of stupidity of what you're doing, but without judging you. They're saying, okay, what about if you tried this?
Right.
So sort of saying like, what about if you seduce rather than dictate? What about seducing? Because he goes, you're really good at that. Look at how you are in every other situation in your life. But for some reason, when something's really important like this, you attack. So it was a real question of, because there's always going to be people in your life that trigger you. I know it's a bit of a trendy word, trigger, but there's certain people that like just are annoying.
Yeah.
Roy is one of them. He's a Leo. And, but I love him as well. He's amazing. He's really talented. And we have this insane legacy together, but we still argue about everything.
Right.
Like how the things are going to sound, who's going to do what. He's kind of my nemesis in Culture Club. And he tries a lot to get Mikey on his side. He'll try and get Mikey to agree with him on something. But I feel like I've just learned to communicate a bit better. And that was really what Charlie brought to my life. Not just that, but, learning Shakespeare, going into areas of movement, physical stuff, like how you stand on stage. One of the best bits of advice he gave me was, when you walk on stage, instead of shrinking it to your moment, like making it all about what you're going to do, you might sing out a tune, or what if you're going to forget something? He goes, why not expand it? So walk on and look at the band, look at the crowd, look at the venue, look at everything. Take it all in and see the magnitude of it, rather than shrinking it to a little petty drama about, oh, my throat, that stuff, And I'd say, I did 112 shows in New York. I didn't get a sore throat, because I think your mental attitude is so essential to, personal happiness, like the way you think about things. I mean, everything is about the way you think about things. It doesn't matter what it is. And I think I realize that now. I'm not saying I always think about things in the right way, but I'll definitely try more now.
I love your optimism as well for the world, but I wonder how you find the modern world, because we live in a world now where the discourse is not very nice, where it's all about having a polarized opinion rather than putting empathy first. I mean, knowing we're having this conversation today, I was thinking about the tragic death of Liam Payne recently.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the comments after that, it felt so devoid of humanity, so devoid of care. So, it was just really judgy about the way that he was living his life at the end. And it's like, there's a reason why that's going on. Why have we ended up in a place where we don't get under the surface?
I think that in the old days, if somebody wanted to say something nasty, they had to write a letter.
Yeah.
Angry with Halifax. I saw Boy George on the TV and he's disgusting. I had a few of those. They used to make me laugh. But now people have got easy access to each other. And what's fascinating about, the internet is that we have this amazing freedom to communicate with each other, and all we're doing is criticizing each other or, damning each other. And spiritually, we're supposed to be moving into this age of truth, right? Which is why they say a lot of things are being exposed, celebrity behavior, things like this. And I was thinking the other day, obviously with the whole Trump thing, it's like, is it that people really secretly like darkness? Do you know what I mean? Like they actually like the idea of, hostility. I don't know. It's a strange one because, I often listen to people, and I used to be like it myself. I'd gossip about people, and I'm saying I don't now, but I see it for what it is. I see that it's just gossip and it's not based in any fact. In the case of like Liam Payne, I'd watched him a few days before it happened. I remember watching online, and I'd actually put a message under a post saying he's off his nut, which wasn't very nice, but I felt it. I felt like he was out of control. And when it happened, it just hit me the same way that Amy Winehouse hit me, just because it felt so senseless.
Yeah.
I was up at 5 a.m. and it came up on the American news, and I literally was like, what the fuck? I was literally like, no, this isn't real. I couldn't take it in. And I think everybody felt like that. And, I'm always appalled by people's comments. Somebody tweeted to me, oh, you only care because he's good looking. And I was like, fuck off. You're an idiot. That's all you care about. It's like, no, actually, I care about his family. You know, I watched the dad, heartbreaking. I mean, I was quite tearful about it. I actually really felt very sad.
You've been there. You've been in the public eye. You've been famous at a young age. You've had challenges with substances in your own life. You now, actually, another parallel, you've been a judge on The Voice in Australia, right? You've been not a judge, because they don't have judges on The Voice. You've been a coach on The Voice. So what do you think we can learn from his tragedy?
There's that saying there, but for the grace of God, you think, there's so many times when I could have come to a sticking end myself. I'm really aware of that. But, I don't want to make what happened to Liam about myself. It's very separate. There are things about rock and roll that are cliches. And even growing up, even though I knew about Janis Joplin and, Jim Morrison and all the other, Brian Jones and all these people, I knew what they went through. You don't really think about that when you're a kid. You don't take that into account unless you're smart. When I meet people who've never done drugs, I want to hug them. When I meet people who say, I've never taken a drug, I've never drunk, I'm always like, well done, especially if they're young. When you see someone in a meeting and they're like 22, you think, thank God they found this now, But it's all of that stuff is a kind of game of Russian roulette. It's like, people take drugs because they don't want to be here. It's very hard to connect with the universe for most people, you know what I mean? And we're not really, I think it's a shame that schools don't educate people more about spiritual things.
Yeah.
That it's not such a religious idea that, you talk about how to manage life. There's so many things you just don't get taught as a kid.
So if you could go into a school today, knowing what you've done, knowing what you've seen, and looking at the stories of people like Liam and Amy and Janice and all the many, many others, what would you want to tell those young people?
The problem is they wouldn't listen.
If they did, though?
They'd laugh at me and they'll say, oh, you silly old git, like, what do you know about it? Because everybody thinks they know how to handle it, and this is one of the funny things about fame. Every famous person thinks, don't worry, I got this.
Yeah.
They all think it.
So why is fame so hard to deal with for so many people? Like, what is it? Because a lot of people chase it and think they love it.
Well, what did Bowie say? Makes you loose and hard to swallow, puts you there where things are hollow. I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
It's a tough one because, I've never relied on one thing in my life. Like, I DJ, I make music, I do art. If one creative door closes on me, I'll kick down the next door, because I can't sit still. So, for me, I have to do something with my hands. I have to be creative. And it's not necessarily about the money. It's more about I'm going to get bored. And, when you do things for the right reasons, they can't pay off. I don't know. I think it's really hard when you've been successful, like when you've been in a really successful band, and then suddenly the record company loses interest in you. People aren't so bothered about what you do. And if you don't have that tenacity to ignore what you're being told, people always say, oh, people are always telling me what I should do. Do you know what you should do? You should make a record with this one. I'm like, I don't fucking want to. I work with people because I want to work with them. I don't work with them because they're famous. I work with people because, on the internet, I bump into all sorts of people. And I'll say, oh, would you make music? I'll send me a track, let's have a listen, see what I can do, And it's really about the idea, not about whether someone's going to give you a leg up. Because, when you do those sort of celebrity collaborations, they're always crap. Yeah. You think, is that the best you can do? Bowie and Queen being the only example, the rare example of like, okay, that was brilliant. Or there's a couple, but in general, when you see what people do in collaboration, you think, Jesus Christ, is that all you could come up with?
So what advice would you give to those young people?
Get some therapy before you need it. I mean, I think I probably wouldn't have done a lot of the things I did had I had someone to talk to.
Yeah.
If I'd had someone to teach me some philosophy, open my mind up about what I was capable of, what the possibilities were.
Yeah.
And, I think I do try to tell people, but, it's really hard to get people to listen. You know, when you start talking about spiritual things, people glaze over. They're not interested because then they can't understand. People don't understand what they're capable of, you know, by just changing the way they think about things, which sounds really simplistic.
Yeah, but I really hope that they'll listen to this. They'll see the place you're at in your life, what you've done previously, what you're doing now, and think, actually, it's worth it.
A handful of people you could listen to. Neville Goddard, who's this amazing kind of spiritual teacher who's no longer around from the 40s and 50s. Yeah. Alan Watts, Eckhart Tolle. I mean, there's Andrew Huberman. There's so many brilliant people online talking about neurology and, you know, healing and stuff. And some of it's rubbish, but a lot of it's really powerful.
Yeah. And we are such an anxious generation, or live in such anxious times. I think this is the stuff that can really dampen that anxiety.
Yeah, but I think it's repetition. Yeah. Because if you allow your mind to keep telling you the same things, you know, that are just damning you to like this misery, it's good to have something that you go, instead of watching the TV, listen to a podcast, listen to some spiritual wisdom, you know, like persevere. Because, you know, as I say, there are things that I've seen on YouTube that have absolutely altered my existence, which sounds ridiculous. To say I've read a book and it changed my life, but absolutely it can happen and it does happen. And there's great people out there.
Brilliant. Are you ready for some quick fire questions?
Sure.
The 3 non-negotiable behaviours that really matter to you.
People that don't say hello.
Okay, so rudeness.
Like, what is wrong with you? Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't see me, I've got a massive hat on. Like, especially other famous people, you think, come on, we're in the same business. Just say fucking hello. Unfriendliness gets on my nerves because I've been unfriendly, but now I make a point of saying hello to people.
Very good, that's the first one.
Timekeeping.
Very good.
People that are late, I can't stand it. Fucking annoys the fuck out of me.
And the third one?
Going on about how long something's going to take. You know, people go, oh, the train's going to be 4 hours. I'm like, yeah, we all know how fucking long the train is. We're going to spend 4 hours. People just go on about stuff that isn't important. Yep. Like the weather, or how long it's going to take, or blah, 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 or what happened to them last night, or they had a row with the cab driver. Like, you're still in the cab. Yeah. So definitely, you know, people that want to drag you to some boring place. It's like, oh, shut up.
What advice would you give a teenage George Allen O'Dowd just starting out?
Breathe more, breathe slower, just, and smile more, have more fun, because happiness is a choice. Not for everyone, but, you know, you meet people all the time that have got terrible illnesses and disabilities, and they're so fucking positive and joyful, and they make you feel better, even though, you know, you meet people that are dying and they're just so connected. And I've met kids of like 10 years old that are dying of cancer, and their wisdom and beauty is just overwhelming. You know what I mean? Like, you go, wow. So I think just, you know, be a bit more conscious. Be more conscious and less self-conscious.
What's the single best piece of advice you've ever received, and why? My
favourite saying is, you teach best that which you need to learn. So when you are pointing the finger at another person, sometimes if you take a breath, you go, oh, yeah, actually, I do that. I'm as guilty as they are. That's why it's annoying me, because I really shouldn't be doing that, but I'm doing it. So yeah, I feel like, listen. Obviously, Jack Pransky said to me, listen. And in fact, I've had a lot of people say that to me, a lot of spiritual people. You know, you need to listen more, because if you're listening, you learn. If you're not listening, you don't learn anything.
And finally, George, your one golden rule that you'd like to leave people thinking about for living a high-performance life?
No matter what other people do, you know, always be polite and kind. It doesn't matter what mood you're in. You know, you can always stop it and be friendly to people. Like, you know, I used to be such a Grinch. Not like as bad as like Madonna. You see her coming out of a hotel and she looks so annoyed that there's like 10,000 people outside her hotel, but she wants it. It's like I always say, you went to all that trouble to be no trouble, now burst your own bubble. So I feel like accept what you've created. That's always good advice. Like, if you created something, treat it with respect and, you know, enjoy it and try to be as good as you can be. I joke about it a lot on stage. I'll say, you know, I try to be as Boy Georgie as I can, whatever that means to you. You know, I try to sort of, you know, when I walk on stage, I just feel so much kind of joy now.
Yeah.
And I feel like, all right, I'm going to get them, even if I'm going to sing like 5 new songs. You know, I never say it's a new song, ever, because that's like the kiss of death on stage. You just tell them what it's about. Maybe give them some of the lyrics. But that feeling of getting someone to enjoy themselves even though they don't know something, because you know it's good. So it's just a question of listening. Because people are a bit lazy when they come to gigs, like, oh, why haven't you done this? And it's like, well, I'm going to do that as well. But I'm also going to do this. And I think it's good. And I'm good at this, so let me do it. And I feel like, yeah, just if you're engaging with the crowd and you're kind and friendly. When I go and see a band, I can't believe people don't speak.
Right.
You go and see a band, oh, thanks. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm the opposite of that. As you can see, I never shut up.
What a brilliant conversation. George, thank you so much.
Thank you. It
for
was really
joining
good.
us
It was good fun.
High performance. Loved it.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Today's show is sponsored by Vanta, the all-in-one trust management program. Now, here at High Performance, we've tried really hard to create a safe, trusting environment for our guests. And that's why we've teamed up with Vanta, because whether you're just starting or maybe scaling your company's security program, actually having top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. And Vanta automates compliance for ISO 27001, SOC 2, GDPR, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. As well as that, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all of it powered by Vanta AI. Over 8,000 global companies like Flow Health and Cora, they use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Click the link below or scan the QR code on screen to get $1,000 off Vanta. That's $1,000 off Vanta by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code.